Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, Team Mosso at the1916company.com for purchase pricing and availability questions concerning this watch. Today, let us not bury the lead. I have measured this watch on my scale, and it is massive. 400.12 grams, that's 14.1 ounces. Do I have your attention? We are discussing the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore 25721BA in yellow gold. Now this is an F-Series watch retailed in 2007, 42 millimeters in diameter, 14.1 millimeters thick from lug tip to lug tip, just the case. 53.9 millimeters if we include the end links, these little intermediate links, they're called the plots. Total distance across the wrist is a beefy 57.1 millimeters. We have here a bracelet of immense integrity and mass, and we're going to pop this open, and you can see that on the wrist, the watch looks like weighty business. My wrist is 16 centimeters in circumference, and the watch does fit, to be honest. And I might even say that with the bracelet and the clasp underneath, it's better balanced top to bottom than if the same massive watch head were attached to a strap and a buckle. So paradoxically, despite the mass, this is less likely to move around on its own if you like to wear it loose. You can see that it does actually fit, and the canted downward angle of the lugs helps here. So if you've got a wrist my size or larger, 16 centimeters circumference or more, yeah, game on. Go for it. It's not as thick as you would think, and it surprised me that it was only 14.1. With a sloped bezel, you got a decent shot at a dress cuff, and definitely this will fit well underneath a jacket sleeve. Here's your over the top, but remember that angle always exaggerates the span of the watch. Okay, so the nice thing about a standard Royal Oak is you get everything that the original Royal Oak designer Gerald Genta intended, which means a seamless blending of case into lug into bracelet. You lose that on most of the offshores. Remember, the offshore was designed in the early 90s by Emmanuel Guet, and initially it was a watch envisioned primarily for straps. Well, Genta had intended his Royal Oak in 1972 to be a bracelet watch, and so these rather uncommon bracelet-clad first-generation Royal Oak offshores keep a lot of the handcrafted metallurgy that makes a standard Royal Oak so appealing. You know, it takes between 9 and 11 hours to hand decorate these bracelets, so you can see how quite a bit of craft value is retained by purchasing one of these on a bracelet rather than a strap. You can see we have satin vertically brushed in profile. You can see that the bevel of the lug continues perfectly aligned across the shoulders of the links. You can see the satin on the top, how it's perfectly aligned from link to link. You can see that we've got quite a few removable links here fixed in place using screws, so you've got a way to fine-tune the fit of this rather substantial watch, and you can see that also on this side. Here we have an element of a ceramic spring-loaded pin snap, and part of me wonders whether that might have been added in a subsequent service by Audemars Piguet, because that's a fairly modern feature, and you can see how it works with the clamshell. The clamshell lock keeps everything secured, but it can't wear down the ceramic pin snap. That's used on a lot of modern watches to prevent these components from ever becoming loose or reducing their tolerances and tightness. So I do kind of wonder whether that might have been a retrofit later on at the factory. It's a great feature to have. So you can see we have a little clamshell, and then we've got a action that is double deployant with a massive gold clasp on the inside. Taking a look at the case, we have blue nitrile covers for the chronograph pushers, a shroud for the crown, and then a gasket for the bezel. This has always been a exaggerated element of the offshore compared to the thin expression, the hairline-like bezel gasket on a standard Royal Oak. The much larger and more prominent bezel gasket on the offshore has always been part of the design. You can also see that we have what is, in many respects, a unmodified Royal Oak bezel. It is a rounded octagon. This is probably the element of the design that has the greatest fidelity to the 1972 original. So we have a rounded octagon back in the 70s that was inspired by a vintage diving helmet. You can see we have bolts, and they are bolts that are still recessed into the bezel, and that's a good sign because that's how they're supposed to be. They're bolts with nuts on the back, which allows their slots to be aligned all the way around. People wonder, how do you screw them in so perfectly? And the answer is you don't. Now, on the offshore, these bolts are made of steel. You can also see that we have just as we have a hexagonal bolt, we have a hexagonal shoulder in nitrile surrounding the crown. It is a screw-down crown. The watch has a solid case back. It is 100 meters water resistant, and you can see it's a modular chronograph. The center line of the pushers somewhat higher than the center line of the crown. Now we have a feature that was later lost and a qualitative reduction on subsequent offshores. But here we have the Petite Tapisserie dial, and that is the small hobnail, the very small hobnail that you see on the Royal Oak Jumbo. And so unlike the current offshore, which uses a pantograph, or I should say a stamped hobnail, this does use a pantograph. So the stamped Mega Tapisserie is what you get on a current offshore, and you have the Grand, which is pantograph cut, and the Petite on the standard Royal Oaks and the Jumbo, respectively. But back when this was made, you would get the lathe cut dial on an offshore. As a result, you could see all of those tiny details that sit between the hobnails, but also over their surface, 10 to 20,000 individual details comprising this dial on the dial. Now we have blob style indices and baton hands to match, an old-fashioned Royal Oak offshore design. We'll do a quick loom shot so you know exactly what you're getting into here. Now the watch features a set of luminescent indicators that might look a little bit faded in the light, but they are luminova, make no mistake. We also have polished chapped rings for the individual sub-registers, and then a tachometric scale outboard for gauging the speed of an object, such as a race car across a kilometer. Solid gold hands, indices, and AP logos. They will never tarnish or oxidize. You can see we've got a black on gold date disc with a magnifier that sits underneath the crystal. Interesting here, because it is a modular chronograph, the base caliber that carries the date sits underneath the Dubois de Praz chronograph module, which is why it seems so sunken into the dial. Pull the crown out, and the JLC base features hacking seconds. It also features a quick set for the date. We have a Dubois de Praz vertical clutch chronograph module on top of a JLC base. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But the DD module uses a vertical clutch, so there's no jump or stagger when you start up the chronograph. A nice element of refinement. So we actually have a JLC 890 base here, because this is the Audemars Piguet caliber 2326, and we have a 2840 DD module. So the 2326 features a couple of the changes to the JLC 89 as it moved into the modern era, including a more durable free-sprung balance, a more efficient unidirectional winding system with ceramic bearings, and it is a 5-position adjusted 50 joule, again, modular complication. It has the quick set and the hacking. It's a 4 hertz beat rate. And it's got a 40-hour power reserve, and all of that protected down to 100 meters. So you have the Petite Tapisserie dial, the rare full bracelet, the unbelievable mass of this watch, which approaches a full pound of weight, and an unusual look that is 1,000 watt in terms of personality. With this much yellow gold, you had better be a bold type, because AP was not holding back. Reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for purchase and pricing details.